that it's only the executive subcommittee members present in the room that are taking the decisions at this meeting. Others in attendance are there to provide advice. There are no planned fire drills today, and in the event of a fire alarm, please follow the fire exit signs and congregate in the car park. If anybody present might need assistance in exiting the building, then please let Mike Bryant from the Democratic Services team know. The agenda and papers have been published on the Council's website in advance of the meeting. The Council recognises the importance of striking a balance between providing opportunities for the lawful expression of views and any unacceptable behaviours or action that causes disruption, which can lead to our meetings being adjourned. The Council will be making a recording of the meeting, and this will be published in due course. Today's meeting will be run using a hybrid format. Executive subcommittee members and key officers are physically present in the John Meikle room at Dean House in Taunton. Other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or to observe. This meeting is being broadcast, and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. I'd like to further highlight the following hybrid meeting good practice. Please use the meeting chat function only for the purposes of the meeting, primarily to indicate that you wish to speak. Please only speak at the chair's invitation. Please say your name before speaking. And I'd like to remind you of the importance of turning off microphones and cameras when not speaking. Thank you. Item 1, apologies for absence. As I mentioned, Councillor Bill Revans is not with us today, and I am sitting in the chair on his behalf. Graham Oakes will be joining us online, but will be a little bit late. Anything else, Mike? Liz?
Chair, Councillor Theo Butt-Phillips is substituting for Bill Revans, although you are in Bill's chair.
Double bubble. Good to have you here, Theo. Thank you. We have no apologies for absence from officers. Declarations of interest, anyone? No. Public question time. I can advise you that there are no public questions for consideration today, which brings us to the first substantive item. Item 4, operation of the Gravity Enterprise Zone Executive Subcommittee. I'd like to point out that we have here with us today Chris Hall, we have Mickey Green, Paul Hickson, Kinga Grabarczyk, and they will add any additional points to this particular item. I'll hand over now. Who's kicking off first? Paul, thank you.
Thanks. I think this is a brief item, Chair. Obviously, this is the first meeting of this subcommittee, which was set up during 2024 when we were preparing for the momentum of the Gravity project and the Agritas investment. So just 2 slides here to get us through this item, which is essentially a kind of a procedural one. First one, just to remind us of the functions of the subcommittee, and I'll just touch on them briefly. So managing, I think at the centre of the committee's tasks, the executive subcommittee's tasks, are managing the locality investment plan for the Gravity site. Alongside that, managing and monitoring delivery risks, opportunities and outcomes, both in terms of the overall Gravity development and site-specific and indeed possibly related off-site projects. To oversee and act on feedback raised by members, stakeholders and representatives of local communities through the really important engagement and consultation that is associated with the project. To oversee and assist with maximising the outcomes and the benefits that we aspire for the project to bring to Somerset. And on occasions, I suppose, linked to that first function, approving the commitment of expenditure or expenditure decision related to the investment plan. So that those are the functions of the subcommittee. If we just move on to the next slide, I think we're just bridging here the points at which the subcommittee was established and updated portfolio roles, which were agreed, I'll say the autumn in that fact, and just confirming and clarifying the membership of the subcommittee. So the leader of the council, written down as the chair, the lead member for economic development planning and assets as deputy chair, and then the deputy leader and lead member for finance, procurement and performance, and then lead members for transport and waste services and for public health, climate change and environment. So I suppose the five portfolios with greatest relevance to the project and what it will achieve. So just covering the background there, Chair.
Thank you very much, Paul. Liz?
Apologies if it's on your next slide. Can we just clarify who needs to be in the room for this subcommittee to be quorate? I believe there are two of those roles that are identified as needing to be in the room amongst the three that make us quorate.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. If I could quickly answer that question. So under the terms of reference, for the meeting to be quorum, we need 3 members in the room, and that needs to include either the lead member for economic development planning and assets or the lead member for finance, procurement and performance. So just to be really clear today, we have both of those members here.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for that question, Liz. Should we carry on? Is the item done? Well, I don't think there's even really much there for me to summarise, frankly, but thank you very much for setting that out. That's all been very clear. We'll move on then, in that case, to item 5, Gravity Enterprise Zone Delivery Progress Report. We have a supplementary paper on that. It was remiss of me earlier not to introduce, I'm afraid. Very true. Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for the hint. We do need to do that. So the recommendations are under item 4, moving back to that, that the subcommittee A notes the executive role changes and agrees the membership. B agrees amended terms of reference. C agrees that the subcommittee should meet at least quarterly. Can I have hands in favour of that recommendation, please? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Now I'll move on to item 5, at which point I'll just say I should have introduced also that we had Louise Darch and Alison Blom-Cooper with us this morning as well. So we move on to item 5, Gravity Enterprise Zone Delivery Progress Report. Who's going to pick that up first for us?
Chair, if I just say a little bit by way of introduction, and then you'll have the delight of us going from different parts of the officer team to cover different sections in the report. Each meeting of the subcommittee, we will bring a progress report which will relate to those functions of the subcommittee, and it will give members an overview of developments since the previous meeting, covering the different work streams associated with the project. Where we need to bring specific decisions, we'll make sure they're captured in the report as well. It will provide the subcommittee with an opportunity to see progress, obviously, to monitor and manage the risks, as I've mentioned previously, and to understand progress with the project. It will also be a mechanism for the kind of feedback we're getting from stakeholders to be channelled through the executive functions of the council, and where they need discussion and action considered, that to be part and parcel of our process with our kind of involvement in the project as well. So expect this to be a core part of all meetings of the subcommittee. And I suppose my colleagues might not welcome me saying this, but I think as well as the substantive business covered in the report, it'd be helpful to understand if this is giving you what you need in terms of those functions and that kind of overview of the project. So any reflections about that aspect, I think we'd very much welcome and receiving too. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Who's going to pick up next? Louise, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Louise Darch. So I'm one of the planning officers here working on the Gravity project, and I'll be providing a brief update on the status of the LDA compliance application for Agratas's Building 1 proposal. Next slide, please. So as many of you will be aware from various members' briefings that we've done over the last year, just over the last year, an application was validated by the local planning authority in August last year for the first compliance application for built form on the Gravity site. That was submitted by Agratas, and the proposals comprise a significant quantum of floor space at just under 250,000 square metres gross, including the battery manufacturing cell facility itself, staff welfare facilities, ancillary development, hard and soft landscape, transport infrastructure, security infrastructure, and drainage. And you'll see on the slide in front of us, the blue line to the left of the master plan image actually outlines Agratas's ownership. That's 75% of the LDO site. The pink line, the wider pink line, some of it's unfortunately cut off, but that delineates the extent of the Gravity LDO designation, so the wider LDO boundary. And you'll see that the Building 1 red line boundary lies to the west of the Agratas ownership, closer to Enterprise Way, roundabout to the Purton side of the former ROF site. Next slide, please. So here we've just included some visuals of the Building 1 proposal, just to contextualise what the future buildings are anticipated to look like in the context of the surrounding landscape setting. We've just noted from previous briefing sessions for members that the question around colour has been raised. So it's probably worth noting here that the colour palette for the wider Gravity LDO site is established on a comprehensive landscape colour assessment that's done. This is known as an environmental colour assessment, and it seeks to ensure that the proposals for all buildings across the site respect the wider landscape setting, and that's a document that's produced in accordance with the Landscape Institute's guidance, and that's now set a precedent in terms of colour palettes for the rest of the developments coming forward. Next slide, please. So this slide just provides some extracts of the plans and elevations which informed the assessments of compliance against the requirements of the Gravity LDO. Just as an example, you'll see on the left-hand side of this slide, there's a colourful plan that relates to building heights across the LDO site. And also to the bottom right-hand side, you'll see a elevational drawing of the proposals in the context of some surrounding key landmarks in the surrounds of Somerset. And it's just to give an understanding of how the proposals fit within the LDO parameters that have been established with regard to the Gravity LDO itself. So that enables us to establish whether the building heights that are proposed across the staggering of the building actually accord with what had been approved under the Gravity LDO. Next slide, please. So between August and December last year, the Local Planning Authority worked closely with Agratas as the applicant and key consultees such as the Environment Agency, Natural England, National Highways, Historic England, the Internal Drainage Boards and other key stakeholders to ensure that the level of information that had been submitted with regard to the compliance application provided sufficient comfort to demonstrate compliance with the Gravity LDO. The conclusions of the assessment was that the proposals were deemed to be compliant, and therefore the recommendation was made that a notice of compliance was issued subject to conditions late last year, and ultimately resulted in the notice of compliance being issued on the 11th of December. And just to note that we've included a link to that full assessment, so the delegated report link is there on that slide, and we can circulate these after the meeting. Next slide, please. So we've just included this diagram to provide some context in terms of the next steps with regard to the compliance process in respect of Building 1. So as I've just mentioned, the notice of compliance was issued on the 11th of December, and that decision was made subject to conditions. So there's now a requirement prior to commencement of construction on site to submit 2 documents that I'll mention on subsequent slides. And we are expecting those submissions to come in early this year in advance of construction commencing on site, either Q1 or Q2 of this year. Likewise, ahead of the targeted opening date for building one, which we understand is late 2026. Similarly, there'll be a requirement to submit further information prior to the operation of the building, and I'll come on to that on the next slide. So, similar to a planning application, there is the ability for the local planning authority to attach conditions to a notice of compliance. And as part of the assessment, due to obviously the programme and the nature of the technology relating to the Agritas Building 1 facility, there were aspects of the submission that we would require further information prior to commencement or prior to occupation. So there are 6 conditions that we've attached to the notice of compliance. So before construction begins, this includes the requirement to submit a demolition and construction environmental management plan in respect of the potential environmental and pollution impacts associated with the construction in regard to noise, dust, vibration, etc. And this was a very specific request of the Environment Agency. And this detail is now being worked through at a high level with the principal contractor. So we've had early discussions with Sir Robert McAlpine in terms of their wider approach in terms of the construction phase. The second requirement is to submit a site waste management plan, and that's to deal with the approach to construction waste during the construction phase. There is also a subsequent requirement in terms of waste management on site, which relates to the operational phase. So I'll just go on to the operational pre-occupational requirements. So there are 4 pre-occupation documents that are required to be submitted prior to the operation of the facility. At the request of the Environment Agency, this includes a surface water drainage network maintenance and management plan, a occupier specific travel plan, and I think some of you may recall that we've mentioned there were aspects of the travel planning design that Agritas weren't able to fully work up at this stage due to uncertainties with regard to where their workforce will be coming from. So the requirement is now for us to have a comprehensive set of agreed measures based on workforce, the substantive workforce locations with regard to their main travel plan measure, which is their shuttle bus facility. There's also been some discussions with regard to that provision in terms of whether that could be a demand responsive facility and potentially serve a wider public audience, but that's subject to conversations with regard to the governance groups that Alison will talk about shortly. There's also a requirement to submit the operational waste management strategy. That is definitely based on the detailed aspects of how the facility will be operating, and that technology is such fast-paced industry that it would be preferable for us to have that conversation at the stage at which we're getting closer to the operational phase. So this is why that's been conditioned. Sustainability framework is the final document that's required to be submitted prior to occupation, and that's required for Agritas to demonstrate how the sustainability credentials that have been outlined in their compliance submission are actually going to be delivered on site once they've are at a more advanced design stage. So finally, for me, there is a requirement for all of these documents to be prepared in consultation with the LDO governance groups, and these are advisory groups known as the Environmental and Social Value Group and the Transport and Infrastructure Management Group. And Alison's just going to provide some further detail with regards to those groups.
Thank you, Louise. Yes, as Louise has mentioned, I'm just going to cover in a little bit more detail the local development order governance groups today. I'm sure you're aware that the Gravity local development order itself was subject to a Section 106 agreement that placed a number of obligations on the site owners. And Schedule 2 of the Section 106 agreement requires the setting up of 3 advisory groups to support the development. These are technical groups in the main. They're non-decision making groups, but they provide a mechanism for input into the wider project. So the first of those is the Gravity Strategic Management and Delivery Team, which has been meeting monthly since September and provides strategic oversight of the impacts of the delivery and operation of the developments and looks to mitigation of the development impacts. So that contains players from the Gravity team, the Agritas team, and the council team meeting monthly. Alongside that is the Transport and Infrastructure Management Group, and that's largely around providing technical support and advice in relation to all transport impacts relevant to the site, and includes representatives from bodies such as National Highways and Somerset Highway teams, and that has been meeting since October 2024. And then the third group is the Environmental and Social Value Group, which is providing technical support in relation to environmental and social value matters relating to development at the Gravity site. And that includes representatives from a number of organisations such as Environment Agency, Natural England, Somerset Ecology Services, Environmental Health, the College, Somerset Council Skills Team and Economic Prosperity Teams. Because that's got such a wide remit, that's now been has established 3 subgroups which are listed on the slide there, which are the socio-economic group, which is looking at jobs, employment and supply chain matters, the demolition, construction, environmental management group, which will be particularly important to support the discharge of the condition that Louise has just described, and is obviously very much related to construction phase. And then the environmental sustainability group, which is around very much the operational phase. All three advisory groups are active, have terms of reference and membership agreed, and are providing advice both to Sir Robert McAlpine, who's the main contractor for Building 1, and Agritas regarding the matters that I've just described.
Thanks for that, Alison. Who's next up?
This one's me.
Mickey,
It's me.
over to you.
Apologies. Thank you. Apologies, I'm not there in person. So I'll just give a quick recap on the investment plan, and then summarise the changes that you've got in the paper in front of you, which form a key part of the recommendation. So just as a recap, that 150 million investment fund, alongside funding from national government, it was a key part of attracting Agritas to the UK. Effectively, it's paid for by the retained business rates from Agritas's portion of the Gravity site. Though kind of winding the clock back to the special full council we had, you'll remember that those business rates are insufficient. So we are in hopefully the final stages of negotiating with government a 55 million grant and an extension to the enterprise zone duration from 2042 to 2052. In order to make the funding work and deliver on that commitment. This is cost neutral to the council. At the time, it was highlighted and always envisaged that with a project such as this, or a programme such as this will be a live document, and hence we're coming to you today to recommend some movements within that. It doesn't change those priorities. And I will just remind you of what is it within those investment themes, or buckets as we call them, because some of them are quite broad. In terms of process, subject to the decisions today, we still need to flow through kind of development of a business case, going through subsidy control jointly with national government, and only then do we start to get onto the point where we're considering drawing down of the fund. And clearly at that point, and we're already working on it in terms of what the safeguards we need to put in place for the council to make sure that when we do issue that funding, given that our ability to pay for it is predicated on in part on future business rates, that we make sure we protect the council in doing that. But all of that is kind of work to come, if you like. And we're working closely with Maria, Nikki Hicks and finance colleagues in terms of those elements, including how we go about the borrowing. But just to kind of remind you, so strategic site access and movement, that covers active travel, Any improvements to public transport or mobility potentially includes reinstatement of a rail link, though that's not identified within the funding envelope at the moment. And it includes our contribution to roads. So to be clear, we're not building any roads and we're not paying for the entirety. There are three elements. There's the potential new junction on the M5, which is the responsibility of Highways England. There's the perimeter road on the site, and there's effectively what we call a missing link between those two, between the new junction and between the perimeter road. So that element of the funding, the investment plan, we're proposing to reduce by 8 million. And I should say that these proposals obviously have been developed in conjunction with Agritas and Gravity and in dialogue with national government. So reducing from 74 million to 66 million. Important, as the slide I think highlights, that does not change our ambitions around active travel and public transport, reflecting the kind of county plan priority that is put on that. The next area is the initial energy connection investment. Chair, you were at the local community forum where we had a presentation from one arm of National Grid, so it's just worth reminding members that there are effectively two energy connections going to the site. There's what we call the temporary one, which is the one involving roadworks at the moment in terms of laying the cables back to the Bridgewater substation over to the Gravity site. That's necessary because it's the quickest way of getting power to the site and therefore aligns with the programme, which means the factory can open with all the benefits that brings. That will not deliver sufficient power for the full 3 buildings that we anticipate Agritas building on site and any other users on the site. So there's a larger substation being built which accesses the high voltage power cables which flow to and from the Hinkley Point site. We're not proposing to put any funding into that latter larger high voltage cable. What we're doing is part funding the kind of the exceptional costs of that interim collections. So again, you can see a significant reduction there in terms of what we're proposing to contribute from 45 million down to 23 million, so a reduction of 22 million. Workforce development is actually, it's more than workforce development. It's probably one of the most critical areas of how we're working with the partners to ensure that we maximise the potential benefits from this site. So it includes training centre, it includes local skills enhancements. But it also includes kind of the work we would want to do with partners to ensure that our young people in Somerset, and that's kind of kids who are currently at primary school, if you like, are kind of making the right choices and supported to get to the point where they can benefit from these roles. It also includes work on supply chain. And again, just to reiterate, that's not saying that money is the only money that we be spent on workforce development and skills, but it's the fact that we're allocating 20 million and not proposing to reduce that now, despite the kind of significant cost increases Agritas are seeing elsewhere, reflects the priority that we understand members attached to that and that clearly we share. So where that additional funding that's kind of reducing from the two above is going into is around additional groundworks and infrastructure. So that includes landscaping and rewilding that kind of address the abnormal ground conditions, delivery of specific operational infrastructure, water supply. And again, Chair, you'll have heard at the local community forum how complicated and important the water management on that site is. So that's a large part of reflecting that. And the final bucket that is unchanged is around local priorities and natural environment. So contributions towards some of our strategic projects in the area, so the Bridgewater Tidal Barrier and improvements to Dunball Roundabout.
Thank you very much, Mickey. Should we break for any questions there, or do you want to carry on? Do you guys want to carry on? Excellent. Dave.
Thank you, Mike. It was just a quick question. I wonder if it might be worth arranging some member visits to the site at milestone points in the construction and fit out of the building. I've been. It's very big, the site, and it probably and if we could visit it regularly, it would give members certainly the members who haven't been there, a sense of progress and the huge scale of this project. Because I believe the physical footprint of the project is actually larger than Hinkley Point C. So my question is, could we arrange a series of regular milestone visits to the site?
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I'm sure we can do that. I'm looking at Paul to see him nodding his head rather than vigorously shaking it. So yeah, we'll do that. We've certainly done that with Hinckley for many years, haven't we,
Yeah.
Dave? So I'm sure we can arrange that as they reach particular milestones, as you say. I think if we went there today, you know, it wouldn't look vastly impressive, although there's quite a bit of activity on site. So let's leave it till later in the year, and we'll try and get something in the diary. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Who else has got a hand up there? I can't see. I should have my computer on, shouldn't I? Is it Sarah Wakefield?
Yes, hello, good morning. I'm sorry, my camera's not working at the moment. I just wondered, looking at these figures, because we've obviously seen costs changes, and that happens obviously continually throughout such a build programme as this, is there any contingency built into these figures?
One for you, Mickey?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, and Paul and King and Mike to add. Effectively, no, Councillor Wakefield, because we're not taking on the risk when it comes to the road. Just picking on that as an example, you know, you're absolutely right. Costs for all construction and everything on this list has gone up, but we're not the ones taking the risk. Ours is just a contribution to that. So that whoever's building the road or whoever's putting in a piece of infrastructure, be it Gravity or be it Agratas, they will be the one taking the risk. So we're not taking the risk. We're not building in contingency. What we need to make sure, obviously, is that we have sufficient business rates income to cover the cost of borrowing that's envisaged in this investment plan.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. And I think that should be made clear to members as well, because they'll be worried about that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good question. And thanks for giving us that clarification, Mickey. That's going to be useful for everyone to hear. Richard Wilkins next, please.
Hello. Yeah. Got a few questions. First one's on the subgroups. It says that obviously each group's got their own terms of reference, but do we understand how often they are meeting and how many times they've met so far?
Okay. As it stands, we are organising them as they're needed. At the moment, there's live discussions with regard to some of the documents that I've mentioned earlier in terms of the pre-commencement requirements on site. Beyond that, I think we'll probably have more of a structured approach to how frequently the meetings are happening. At the moment, they're taking place more frequently than is currently stated in the terms of reference. It's quarterly in the terms of reference, but they're happening probably once or twice a month at the moment. So it will just depend in terms of whether there's currently anything on the table to topical to discuss. That applies to the technical groups with regards to current sort of conversations around these conditions. With regard to the DSMT, I think you're having them monthly.
We've been meeting monthly.
And that's
My other question is really.
Is that another answer, Mickey?
It was, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, please jump in. Thank you.
Yeah, I just thought it might offer Councillor Wilkins some reassurance. So at the next Gravity Strategic Management team, we'll be proposing that Somerset Council takes on the chair of the transport group, reflecting the fact that well, A, others have more of a role in delivery, so there's potential conflicts, but B, how important it is for us to drive progress on that, but also ensure that it's not just all about the roads, but also the clear priorities for the council and in that area are driven forward. So we've had the informal conversations, but I'd want that will be hopefully, or expect it to, I should say, to be confirmed at the next Gravity Strategic Management Team meeting.
Thanks, Mickey. Richard?
Yeah, that actually helps with my next question, which was over the timings of delivering of when we're going to get the a look at the travel plans and all the other sort of infrastructure, in particular with the things like the roads and the active travel routes, so that the council can feed back and make necessary statements and stuff. I just want to be clear on that, but it sounds like that will come through that subgroup. Would that be correct?
Discussions are happening at an early stage now as far as they can, and those will continue until the point at which Agritas decide to make the submission prior to occupation. So once we've worked with them in terms of a plan with regard to the active travel measures and that strategic approach, and then potentially any funding requirements that they might seek from the investment plan, then a submission will come to the authority, and we will consider whether that's appropriate or not. But the process with regard to the conditions is the same as a planning application, where we would receive a application to discharge a condition with regard to the occupier specific travel plan. So there is still that formal process to go through alongside the advice that's received in the interim period.
So that would include any bonds and what have you, presumably at that point.
Through with the advisory group, and that's got National Highways, that's got Somerset Council Highways Department on there, and obviously any sort of contractual arrangements will happen outside of that group, but the conversations will be filtered through the group.
Thank you, Louise. Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Some questions and some comments, if I may. I'll wait until we've seen the slide on risk before I raise that, but I note that it's in the recommendations, which I'm very pleased to see. On paragraph 22, it says obligations discharged. I realise that's a kind of technical term in planning, but it doesn't mean we finished working there, does it? Far from it. So I just really want us to understand that in this public meeting, that obligations discharged doesn't mean that we stop working. And I think what you've just said about Transport and Somerset Council makes that very clear, that whilst the initial obligation is discharged, the work continues with Somerset Council. And then I wanted to make the point, Chair, if I may, that one of the things we've been working on and is included in the forward plan now is about sufficiency of school places in this area. So looking at Puriton and then later at the possibility of a new school at Wilstock, because as we all know, building has been held up in parts of Somerset, but not in this area. And so we are having to look again at school sufficiency in the north of Somerset, and that's something that we're paying close attention to. And there is, of course, SIL monies, and that comes to the Property and Transport Subcommittee, I believe. The other thing I wanted to say, this one has been announced today, the Bridgwater and Taunton College Ofsted outstanding. And that references the number of apprentices, particularly at Hinckley. But so this meeting, I think, is well timed, that actually we can see that on the news this morning, that it's Ofsted outstanding for Bridgwater and Taunton College. And we know too that Strode College is merging with those colleges and Cannington. And so there's going to be an awful lot of joined up working and thinking with Gravity and Agritas right at the forefront of that work. So I think we've got good news today, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liz. Anyone want to respond to what Liz has said?
Just to add to what Councillor Lation has said, there are 2 reports due to go to the Planning and Transport Policy Exec Subcommittee on the 11th of February, requesting civil contributions towards both the schools in Puriton and Wilstock that you mentioned.
Thank you, Alison. Paul.
I think they're very helpful comments as well in terms of both the Ofsted point and BTC and the sufficiency of school places point. Reflecting on hearing those, I think there's a challenge for us, which will I'm sure rise to, of making sure when we bring the progress report, we're as outward looking as we can be about the wider ways in which the council is responding to the project. So helpful kind of prompts in a way to make sure that we think about what we're capturing in the report, because the project is so strategic, it will have many implications, and we can, I think the more rounded we are in the reporting, the stronger the position for the subcommittee will be. So thank you for pointing those 2 out.
Thank you, Paul. And a question from me, probably to Mickey, I think, if I may. Looking at the investment plan there, we're going to spend £30 million more than initially planned on groundworks, landscape and rewilding. I'm just thinking that 30 million buys you a lot of banks and bushes. What exactly are we going to be, is that money going to be spent on? And why wasn't it deemed to be essential beforehand?
I guess in terms of why it wasn't deemed to be essential beforehand is just due to the kind of dynamic nature of the project and therefore their understanding of the costs. So, you know, the piling and as they, for example, as they do their additional works, and I think you've heard before in terms of the water and how there's a changed legislative environment in terms of water, and therefore the activity they need to undertake in that area is more significant. So it just reflects the maturing understanding of Agratas in terms of what their actual costs will be, and therefore how we can make best use of the investment fund to both support the investment to make sure that the factory facility does actually happen, whilst also ensuring that we're focusing that fund on ensuring we get the benefits for Somerset.
Thank you, Mickey. So would it be reasonable to assume then that of that 30 million, the majority would be going to additional groundworks and infrastructure rather than landscaping and rewilding?
I don't think, I haven't got the numbers exactly in front of me, and also I don't want to prejudge, because obviously what we do need to then go through is the kind of business case subsidy control assessment, and then bring back any decisions for how that funding is allocated to this committee. But yeah, I think the groundworks and the water related are more significant than the rewilding. But I think, you know, as I think it was Councillor Wone highlighted, the scale of the site, every number associated with this site is massive. So even if it is banks, it's still, and rewilding, they're still significant numbers just given the sheer scale of the site.
Thanks, Mickey. Very useful. Should we proceed with the presentation?
So fundamental to say that this is a project essentially about opportunity for Somerset. Its implications are obviously hugely significant in terms of our future economy and opportunities for our residents, but it does bring risks by dint of its complexity, and also because of the financial involvement that the enterprise zone status brings for the council to the project, and the complexities of managing an enterprise zone investment fund, given the nature of nature and indeed scale of the project. So part of the work of this subcommittee, as said under the previous item, is to monitor the risks associated with the project and manage them accordingly. So we've set out in the report what I hope is a comprehensive risk register. We'll obviously look to keep that live and update it on an ongoing basis. But just to walk you through this morning the risks as we set them out, I'll concentrate on, as is traditional in these kind of stages, on the red risks in the schedule. But we're obviously very happy to take any questions about the kind of wider risks as set out as well. So again, as you'd expect, we've looked to describe the risk and look at mitigations that either are ongoing or that we would undertake in the future. So the slide we have at the moment concentrates on what we've defined as the strategic risks associated with the project. The first of those I'd draw to attention around the council's capacity to facilitate delivery in the project. That's obviously a significant one. In terms of how we are mitigating that risk through the council restructuring, we will be able to kind of structure our capacity across teams for the project and resource for it. We are looking to sustain a programme director to support the project and help the teams across the council work very closely on the project, and indeed with members, of course, as well, given the strategic significance. And we'll make sure that the kind of the corporate knowledge is retained through changes like Mickey's impending departure from the project. Planning colleagues, seeing Alison's funder, will pursue PPA mechanisms wherever appropriate to ensure that adequate planning resources are in place. We're thinking beyond the Agritas investment here, of course, as well, given the wider opportunities of the site. I suppose second risk we've identified particularly is around failure on an ongoing basis to recognise and act on the kind of importance strategically of the project. I think the actions above will contribute to that, as will kind of making sure our governance is both effective and live. So the meeting of this subcommittee and future meetings provides that kind of focus for managing our involvement in the project. I suppose the next strategic risk is more outward facing than those two previous ones. It's about in the context of a fast moving project with all those globally commercial kind of imperatives behind it, how we maximise or optimise, that's better put, the kind of employment and skills opportunities for our residents, and minimise the leakage of the benefits outside of Somerset where the opportunity could be captured here. So we talked a little bit about in the investment plan about the focus there around workforce. Really important that we work effectively with our partners on this agenda, both across the council and in the wider kind of education and skills arena. And I could point to the LDO governance structure and the economic and social group within the wider ESG monitoring group. So those are our kind of strategic risks. I won't dwell on the kind of the remaining two there, because we haven't kind of accorded the same level of risk to them. So if you move on to the next slide, looking here at, and these are artificial barriers in many ways, but I think we captured them this way. The delivery risks for the project and for the council. The first of those, which we've kind of given a high rating to, is around the kind of specifically with the Gravity and Agritas investment combination. The challenges around the programme and the very ambitious timescales associated with the various statutory regimes that are in place. At the national level, there is a government-led task force and coordination group, which is focused on delivery. So the kind of the national actors working with Agritas and the council, which is a mitigation to that. I think for us locally, early and ongoing engagement with Agritas, with Gravity and other occupiers to come, including early pre-application discussions, and alluded to that, not least through the Gravity strategic management team, working with the site owners to kind of maintain that close working relationship and ongoing dialogue about delivery. The second risk, I suppose, is about the combination effect of this project sitting alongside the ongoing Hinkley Point C development. Now, clearly, we need to monitor and manage that situation and encourage Hinkley Point C, EDF, and Agritas and the wider kind of community that develops around Gravity to engage closely, look at the kind of best purposing of assets and skills over time as well. If we move on to the financial risks, it's a bit forbidding to see all those marked up as red, isn't it? The first is around, I suppose we're looking here in the first one at the investment plan, which we've just discussed. So obviously that's That's a very significant, it's a unique involvement of the council in a project at this scale. So the mitigations to the council there around the role of the subcommittee in ongoing review of the financial position, supported by I think the excellent work we've done to date. I would claim it to be around modelling the kind of the investment plan and the enterprise zone fund against all the kind of project delivery factors and kind of macro ones as well, so that we're very clear around the proceeds of the project and the kind of expenditures against those and the kind of assumptions that we need to make. And then finally, ensuring that any grant agreements we make to third parties are underpinned by adequate security arrangements as well to cover the council's exposure. And then the final two strategic risks around or financial risks, I suppose, are more outward looking. So the first is around, I suppose, linked to the modelling assumptions, really, how the impacts of the wider financial context, be that inflation, borrowing costs or other factors, which over a long project will inevitably vary, the kind of managing and monitoring the implications of those. So some very practical mitigations ahead for us, including making sure we only borrow what and when it is necessary to do, and just addressing the volatility through that. And then the final financial risk around the trajectory of business rate income, be that at a lesser or a slower rate than we've modelled into the assumptions of the investment plan. So we will work with the site owners to maximise delivery on site. Linked to the point above, again, the funding agreements, the kind of conditions we make to those will look to protect our position as fully as we can. And as you would expect, ongoing revisiting of the model and the assumptions within it to make sure that we know where we are in real terms over time. And then our final area of risks is around the kind of partnership and stakeholder perhaps risk. So here we've identified two areas of risk. I suppose one, how we work with our kind of local and regional partnerships and partners to support delivery. And then secondly, and I'll come on to this in a moment in terms of where we are, the extent and effectiveness of our communication and engagement with local communities and local stakeholders. And here mechanisms like the community forum have been established to address that risk.
Paul, could I just back you up one slide, please? You reverse one slide. Yeah, there we go. The third item there has an unmitigated risk of 16, which is red. The top item has a mitigated risk of 16, which is amber. Shouldn't they both be the same colour? No.
No, in the matrix, it's looking at the impact and probability. So the higher so if the impact is higher, although it would be 4 by 4. No, they should be the same colour. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Which is it? Isn't it amber 16?
I would have to check, but yeah, most likely, yeah.
Okay, Liz.
Risk. Obviously, overall risk sits with the audit committee, but it is one of my endlessly exhausting subjects, trying to get some risk through separate papers where the risk assessments look the same. So in a lot of places we have inherent risk, current risk and target risk. And in other places we always show which is the likelihood and which is the impact. So you can understand where where likelihood might shift, but impact stays the same. So if it's possible, please, for the risks for this subcommittee to be laid out in the same way as other committees, and hopefully using the IdeaGen software so that we get consistency of how the risks are presented. And using IdeaGen, when you put in the likelihood and the impact, it picks up the dot in the right place on the matrix of colours, and then it's not down to human error whether you put the right colour in the box or not. So if we can get this display of risks, which are very, very significant to the council, and get that in the right format, then I think we will avoid those slight confusions. It's happened in lots of other committees, and so every time I'm in a meeting I'll keep asking that we use the and that there are a couple of our officers who are doing really good work on standardising risk documents. So I wanted to ask that one first. If I may go on, I know that we have a recommendation from paragraph 16, which is about the multiple local authorities with enterprise zones and indeed free ports, and where that sits with us having a new government. And then a further risk for me, which is about the new government and housing numbers that have to be delivered. And I think this will be particularly for our parish and town council partners, that will become an elevated risk for those communities, particularly the smaller communities and those right along the kind of Polden Ridge. So if I may, I would like the LCNs in this area to look at this too, and I'm sure that's possible. I know the parishes are already looking at it and talking about it. It should be reflected, I believe, in the risks that we're looking at. So hopefully, Chair, that can be a helpful intervention, and we will present more fully, more completely and more properly in the future, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Yep, some really good suggestions there that I'm sure we can take on board. I've no doubt Mr. Bryant has made a note of those things. Thank you.
And one more on finance. I know our section 151 officer is on the call. While we've got the financial risk slide up, could we possibly, Chair, call her in, Maria Christofi?
Here she is, as if by magic. Maria.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come in. Obviously, the risks here are being flagged. Our role is to try and find mitigating actions to try and bring down these risks, but some of these risks will be out of our control. The retained business rates one in particular, government are looking at making some changes around this, so we will need to follow what government are considering. The Chancellor announced that in her speech a few months ago. So we will be watching this space and we'll update the risks accordingly, but it's particularly important for us that we understand the financial context and the implications should these risks come to fruition.
Thanks very much, Maria. I think we're getting a picture here, aren't we, of how major these risks are and how important the mitigations are to keep us out of trouble. I mean, I'm going to make a small suggestion as we proceed that we slightly amend recommendation C on the basis that these meetings are only planned to be held on a quarterly basis. I think, you know, we could be, as a corporate body, tripped up quite badly by any risks in between those meetings. And I think we need some kind of mechanism to bring them to the attention of the chair of this committee and probably Liz and I as well in between times, in the event that there is some kind of unmitigated risk that is going to give us a bit of a major problem. So I'll come up with something in my head before we get to that point, and we can have a bit of a discussion around that. Maria.
Thank you. I was going to say, in terms of the financial position of the council, obviously any financial risk that comes to fruition puts our position into a much more challenging one than we're currently in. I would suggest that we'll be tracking all of these things, and should something come to fruition in terms of actually happen, you'll see it come through in one of the financial reports. You'll hear it in how I'll be speaking and reporting to members as well. And there's nothing that prevents us having an extraordinary meeting, should there be something that we need to bring to this committee before the next quarterly one is scheduled.
Thanks, Maria. So on that basis, your suggestion would be that we don't need to do anything. We don't need to amend C in order to do that, because it's being tracked in the background anyway, yeah?
Yes, I would. And if we need to bring it to the committee, or if something happens that everyone needs to be aware of, then we can have an extraordinary meeting of this committee. Or if indeed something happens to our finances as a result, then I'll be reporting to members in the usual way.
Thanks, Maria. That's really helpful. Liz, anything else on that? Thank you. Paul.
Just to thank Councillor Lowsham for her feedback on the risks we've shown. It's interesting what you said about the housing impact risk. As we were kind of the discussion going, it occurred to me that in the strategic risks, we've identified that one about the kind of the workforce benefit. It's a companion risk to that one, isn't it, really? So I would suggest that we pick that up as an additional strategic risk. And your point around kind of consistency with the corporate approach to risk is very well made and understood, and we'll can obviously, without being protective of the work we've done, this is our first reveal effectively, so helpful feedback. We'll take that on board, make sure that we're kind of complying with the kind of overall approach and build from here. So thank you for that steer, or both steers.
I should have said, Chair, thank you to all the officers who've worked on these papers and the massive amount that has been done before we've got to this stage. And we all realise, whenever I talk to anyone about the scale of Somerset Council, I always refer to Gravity and Hinckley, Leonardo on one side, and making sure the recycling's picked up on the other side and people's care packages are paid for. It is a massive scale that this council works on. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Do you want to carry on?
Apologies.
Can anyone hear us online?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Mike.
I can hear you now.
I can hear you, Mike.
All right, good. We seem to be back on now. Sorry.
I'll kind of restart if that's helpful to people online. I was just saying that you know, a major pillar of our stakeholder engagement is the local community forum, which we've established. We've had 2 meetings of that forum today, one in the autumn and one last week. It's pleasing to say that both of those meetings have been well attended, and both in terms of the council, Agritas, This is Gravity Limited, and at the second meeting, Sir Robert McAlpine, who are one of the construction partners of Agritas, joined as well, and by the representatives of local communities as well. So we've had good attendance to those meetings, and I think good constructive discussion as well. Thank you, Mike, for chairing both of those sessions too, which has been well received. So that's great to say. We've covered here, and just to say a little bit about how those sessions have operated. In both cases, the council, Agritas, and This is Gravity have provided updates about the project from each of their perspectives. So in some senses, the council overview has been similar to what we've covered in the earlier sections of this report today. We've obviously focused particularly, and thank you to Louise and Alison, on the compliance application first run. So that's of major interest, and we've kind of covered state of play at both of those meetings. You have here the kind of, I suppose, points which have come out of the local community forum meetings to date, issues of relevance to the council, but also to Agritas, and this is Gravity. So hopefully this gives members of the subcommittee a flavour of the kind of areas of interest which have come up in those meetings. I don't think, though colleagues might correct me, there are any kind of particular changes or actions which we need to kind of reflect on in this meeting, but it gives you an overview. In terms of member engagement in the project, obviously that's a very important one as well, and we run periodic all member briefings. Most recently, again thanks to Louise, Alison and colleagues, on the LDO compliance application process, and you've got a flavour here of the different points and areas of focus for members when we've run those sessions, and through wider engagement as well. I hope this gives a flavour of the approach that we're taking to stakeholder engagement and the kind of points and issues that have come through that.
That's great. Thank you very much. I have a question from Richard.
Yeah, just on all these areas that have been highlighted, how do we propose to track progress in each of these areas? Do we have a system in place for that, or will it be sort of more ad hoc as it sort of gets mitigated or whatever?
So I think through a couple of mechanisms effectively. So we will make sure that in terms of the local community forum, we track issues back to the forum meetings. And for instance, at last week's meeting, we focused on matters arising from the first meeting, and we kind of look forward to the next meeting where we'll bring people in to discuss other matters that came out of that session as well. We have an internal working group of officers across the different work streams of the project, and we make sure that the issues that came out of community forum meetings are played back to that group as well, work out next steps accordingly.
Thank you, Paul. Any other questions at this stage? No. Okay. Well, that's everything from you guys on presentation, yeah? Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. It's been a really helpful session, a really helpful item that. I think it's been good to hear Mickey set out the investment issues, for Louise and Alison to set out the planning issues, and for Paul and Kinga to set out the other economic development issues. So thank you very much for that. I think it's been a bit of an eye-opener for me. I think what I really take away from that session is quite how important the mitigations are in terms of minimising the risk to the council, and I think we need to keep a close eye on that. Thank you to Maria for confirming that her team's keeping a close eye on that in the background, and that should we need to, we have the opportunity to have an interim meeting between the otherwise quarterly schedule. So thank you everyone for contributing to that. The recommendations are that the Executive Subcommittee A, approves proposed changes to the Gravity Locality Investment Plan. B, notes the progress of the programme, including the Agritas Building 1 compliance application and the advisory governance group set up to support the delivery of the Gravity LDO set out in Appendices 1 and 2. C, considers and endorses the main risks to the programme set out under paragraph 16. D, agrees to exclude the press and public from the meeting where there is any discussion at the meeting regarding exempt or confidential information. And can I have hands in show of support for those recommendations, please? Oh, yeah, I probably do need a proposer in a second. Thank you very much, Mr. C&G. That we have, well, I'll propose it. Theo is seconding it. Thank you. And let's see those hands again. Excellent. Thank you very much. I'll get a recommendation right eventually. Give me long enough in the chair. Thank you, Theo. And with that, I'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everyone.